lot of people have been asking me about my CDL job and how things are going with it. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about my CDL job. I can't really talk specifically about what I do for work because I'm under an NDA, but I can talk about the kind of truck I drive and my pay and things like that. So I've been driving a tanker truck for about the last 4 months now, and it's about 50% driving and about 50% pretty physical labor. I don't know that I necessarily like the job, but I can tolerate it. It's decent work, and for an entry-level truck driving job, it's actually very good pay. So I can't really complain too much about the job itself. But I do want to talk about whether or not I think it's worth it to get a CDL job. So as of right now, I have about 6 months of experience as a CDL driver, and that opens up a lot more options for me to get a different job. But obviously right out of CDL school, I didn't really have a ton of options. I probably did have more options for work than a lot of entry-level truck drivers because I did have non-CDL driving experience. And some companies will actually count that towards your CDL experience. It just depends on the company and the insurance company that they use, whether or not they can count non-CDL driving experience towards work experience. But finding entry-level CDL work is a little bit of a challenge, but once you find work, it's actually usually pretty decent. So financially, things are much better at my current job than they were at my last one. I've gone from making about 22 an hour to making 32 an hour. And so that's a very significant jump in pay, of course. I'm not working as many hours, unfortunately, but even so, I am being paid significantly more. Most companies have a sign-on bonus, whether you're an entry-level worker or a more experienced driver. In my case, it was a very substantial sign-on bonus, and that's paid out over the first year in 2 installments, one at 6 months and one at 1 year. And that's very common throughout the industry, and as you get more experience, the sign-on bonuses tend to get bigger. So that does cause a lot of job hopping, so people tend to not stay at jobs for more than a year or two in the truck driving world, unless they just happen to really like the job or they're doing particularly financially well. But it's fairly common for people to only stick around at a truck driving job for about a year or two at most. And of course, worker treatment. I find that worker treatment for truck driving jobs is actually generally pretty good. They tend to treat their drivers pretty well because if they don't, they'll just lose their drivers. Once someone has more than about 3 months of experience, it's very easy to go out and just get another job. Most companies don't really have enough drivers as it is, so they are really heavily incentivized to keep their drivers happy. There's also a lot of government regulations around truck driving that basically force the employers to make sure that their drivers are getting enough rest and they're operating safely. Things like that. And so you'll find that a lot of companies will bend over backwards to keep their drivers happy. That's definitely not true of every company, but most companies I've encountered are like that. And finally, I want to talk about job outlook and whether or not I think I'm going to continue in this industry. And the answer is I have never planned to stay as a driver long term. I have other interests like this YouTube channel that I'm focusing on. I'm not super passionate about driving trucks. It is a good source of income. I'm a decent driver. The work itself is somewhat entertaining. And long term, I don't plan on working as a truck driver. But if I do end up working as a truck driver long term, it's not the end of the world. I'm not seeing any signs of this industry really weakening a lot. I can see how different parts of the industry can sometimes kind of collapse. Like over the road driving, the pay isn't the best right now, but it was a couple of years ago. It was very high pay going over the road. These days, it's mostly local driving that needs to be done. And so the pay there is really high, and there's lots of available jobs locally. People always need to be fed, people always need basic supplies, and truck drivers supply all of that kind of stuff. So short of an entire society collapsing, I find it hard to believe that there will ever be a time where we don't need some amount of truck driving. And there just aren't that many qualified drivers out there. A lot of people don't have a good enough driving record, and a lot of people have a really hard time with the skills to become a good truck driver. It's not a career for everyone, and so I do think there's always going to be somewhat of a shortage of drivers out there. So I have no doubt that even in economic downturns that I'll still have work. And if I want to relocate somewhere else, obviously the type of work depends on the area that you live in and what other industries are operating in that area. But there's almost always a CDL job available. And CDL jobs usually pay really pretty well because they're in demand and they require special licenses and training and experience. So overall, I actually am fairly okay with my job. I hope I can accomplish my personal goals and I can leave this job eventually. But it's a perfectly viable career, and if you just need money and need a decent, stable job, I definitely recommend anyone that's a good driver go out and at least explore the option of getting a CDL and see if it's a good fit for you.